Thank you, Ann Hamilton Finkel, for being our recording person. We are doing this for posterity from the Kimball children. And today is January the 18th, 2020. And we're at Bill and Jill's home. And Carole and Bob and I are going to just talk for about 45 minutes about our families and ourselves. So I want to talk about the genealogy just for a minute. The grandparents were Dr. M.C. Kimball. Everybody called him Dr. Kimball. Our father was also a Dr. Kimball, but when we talked about Dr. Kimball, that was Dr. Kimball.
In Tulsa.
In Tulsa. Then Dr. Kimball was married to Lena. Okay, and go.
What did the M stand for?
Melvin.
Melvin what?
Okay, Melvin Clinton Kimball.
Oh, I'm sorry, Clinton.
Melvin Clinton.
She said.
Dr. Kimball was married to Lena, as she was called. Helena Vance was her real name, but we call her Mertimmel. So the term Mertimmel, which Jill likes to go by now, is was actually our grandmother, Lena Vance Kimball, was Mertimmel. And then their three children were Janice, Margaret, and Melvin. And Janice was our Aunt Janice. And then Margaret and the Troxels lived in Houston. Margaret lives in Tulsa, and her family was in Tulsa. And then Melvin was our dad, Mel. And those were the three kids. And then each of us will talk about the generations beyond that. So that's an entree into the posterity. So Bob, would you talk please about your family, just casually about your family?
Well, I was born in Oklahoma, Fairfax, Oklahoma. Dad was a doctor up there at Phillips Petroleum. I met my wife Cynthia at North Texas State. We got married in 1964. Spent some time there in Dallas. Got drafted. Spent almost 3 years in the Army. In the Army we had Kelly in 1967 and Jennifer in 1969. Moved to Houston. Pardon me. After the military, after the Army, and worked various jobs. And we grew up in that area down there on the Gulf Coast. What else?
Where'd you go to school?
Well, both. I met Cynthia in North Texas. I went to North Texas State College, University, and graduated in '64. Cynthia and I got married in June of 1964 down in Galveston. Yes, Ann?
Were you in a fraternity?
At North Texas, I was a Lambda Chi Alpha. It just so happened that my beautiful girlfriend at the time was elected a Crescent Girl, as was our sister. That was I'm not quite sure how to classify it, but
Sweetheart.
she was a sweetheart of the fraternity. And I think a little bit had to do with the looks, being a beautiful lady that my sister is.
And Cynthia.
My wife, Cynthia. Yes.
So,
When you attended school, was your sister and Bill out of school? Or did y'all go at the same time?
Well, Carole is a little bit older than I.
What's the age difference?
5 years,
Okay.
if you don't mind. So she was already out, she was already married. Bill graduated, when did you graduate? 62. So I started at North Texas in 62, graduated 64.
So y'all were together 1 year?
I don't remember. I think
2
we
years.
were too.
And Carole was there as well, so we were all there together for a period of time,
I don't remember.
in the early sixties.
And Charles was a Landakai, and these guys were Landakais, and I was a Crescent Girls, lots, well, Cynthia, so it was really all in the family. We it was amazing. They honored us.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about, do you wanna talk about your family, Carole, about your kids?
Okay, Charles and I married in 1956 in Borger. We had 3 children, and Chuck, Richard, and Ann. And we went to school at North Texas, but then Charles moved up and went to school up in Kansas City. He wanted to become a dentist, and he was on the dental track at that time. And then eventually he got drafted in the Army, and so that interrupted our time. But
What year?
oh gosh, I don't know.
Speak up.
Okay.
Around what year?
59 or 60,
Was when he got drafted?
yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh, so, Kelly and Jennifer, Bob's children, Carole's children, Chuck and Richard and Ann. Of course, Ann is our recorder here, so Ann's helping us out. So I want to talk about Mom and Dad for a little while. Daddy was a doctor, and they met in New York. They moved out here because of Frank Phillips Corporation, and then we grew up in a little town, Borger, Texas, out in the Panhandle of Texas. Moved out there in '43, grew up there, went to high school there, went to college from there, and so had a lot of our early time was out in the Panhandle of Texas.
And I'd like to just interject here, people were being drafted right and left to go to war. But Dad was serving his time, supporting Phillips Petroleum Company and Phillips Chemical Company by supporting the people who worked for the company to help regenerate the war effort. And so that was, I think, how he was serving his country.
So,
Bill, I like that, if you could please recount the Little Doc.
Little Doc?
Uh-huh.
Well, one thing, the sheriff in Borger, Hugh Anderson, couldn't tell Bob and I apart. But there were a lot of people like that. So he called us both Little Doc. Daddy being a doctor, he called us Little Doc. And he had a big speaker on the front of his car. And if he saw us, it was just a little town. But if he saw Bill or Bob mistreating or doing something wrong or going too fast or anything, Hugh Anderson would get on that speaker and say, "Little Doc, slow down over there."
Well, speaking of that sheriff, I remember one time Dad, he had to drive several miles to go into Borger to the hospital from where we lived.
Via Vista.
Via Vista, and so he was whizzing down the road one night, and the sheriff stopped him, and he walked around and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, doctor. Are you going to the hospital?" He said, "Yes, I am. Move right on." And so, and he wasn't in an emergency. He just drove fast, and he was going to the hospital like he did 2 or 3 times a day.
Education, Daddy had an MD, of course. He went to the University of Illinois, finished medical school there, and then went to Bellevue Hospital in New York to continue his education, internship and residency. Mother grew up in New York, and she was there. She'd gone to Pratt Institute. Pratt Institute's in Brooklyn. She had a master's degree in nutrition from Pratt, and so she was in the hospital system doing nutrition plans for the hospitals, and Daddy was a young MD there. But we attribute a lot of our health and our young age and our strength and our blessings to Mom and Dad, because they were young for their age, and I think we're young for our age too. Carole's 84, I'm 81, and Bob is 79. So this is the year 2020.
You did not have permission to say that.
Bob, talk about your career, please, since college.
Graduated June of '64, as I mentioned, got married. Did various short-term jobs, open road camper, Marriott Motor Hotel for a while. I graduated with just a BA management degree, and I was at, I think I was at Open Road Camper when I got drafted. Left and spent 2 years, 10 months, and 10 days. Went through Officer Candidate School, artillery, and mustered out May of '69, I think it was.
So you were a gunner.
I was a rookie, in basic training. From basic training, I got into OCS instead of an MOS program where you develop your skill for the Army. I was able to get into OCS, Officer Candidate School, in the artillery school. Stayed there at the school to instruct, to teach artillery techniques during that 2-year period after I became an officer. And at that point, after 2 years, I was able to fulfill my commitment and get out of the Army in May of '69.
So you were pretty good at targeting,
Well,
if you taught it?
I could do the various functions of artillery control. There are different categories to operate and fire a howitzer, for example. And I was trained in all those different facilities, all those different skills. But primarily I was an instructor.
Okay.
Carole, will you talk about your career, please?
Well, I'd like to start with high school because one of the big loves in my life was ballet. And I took ballet from the time I was about, not even before I was a teenager. I was a ballet student, and it was the real interest in my life, along with my academics. And I loved artistic things. And I took ballet from my ballet teacher was named Newcomb Rice, and his wife Kitty. She was from Scotland, and we had. I spent so many. They were my second parents. You know, I just really enjoyed being with them. And then I also went to North Texas. I met Charles, my husband, while we were both in separate high schools. We were juniors in high school. He was at Phillips High School and I was at Borger High School. We went to a dance one night with my girlfriends. And Jane Farquhar knew Charles being out the golf course, at the golf course all the time. So that's where I met Charles, and that was when I was a junior. So we knew each other for a long time and before we got married.
So your career?
I got a degree in teaching, in education, so because I thought I would like to be a teacher. We didn't have the variety of women's work responsibilities that we do now. We could either be a teacher, a secretary, or it was very limited at that time. So I got my teaching degree, and I did teach at Denton High School. I student taught at Denton High School, and I met this wonderful mentor there, and I got a job there after I graduated because Charles was still in school. Then he went to the Army, and so I went to work for Phillips Petroleum Company in Borger, and we just sort of made do until we got out of the Army and we could get back into school. And Charles could graduate, and we moved to Midland, and he went to work for IBM.
And then you continued on and then went into real estate?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Real estate.
Mm-hmm. And then what did you do after that?
As it so happened, our son, Chuck, went to SMU Law School, and I was working in real estate at the time, and I just thought I'd like to do that too, and I thought I could. And Chuck was not so happy about that. But anyway, when he was a 3L, I was a 1L, and I was behind him in law school. So 2 years after he graduated, I graduated from SAP Law School, and I established my law office in downtown Dallas, general practice, all sorts of things. And that was a wonderful learning experience for me. And I just thank God that I've had the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. So, and what are you doing now?
I'm still working as a lawyer for Capital Title Company, helping analyze corporations, entities, trusts, and that kind of thing to make sure that the people who are on the dotted line stay on the dotted line.
Okay.
Chuck, her oldest son, was a lawyer, and then she graduated, became a lawyer, and her son suggested they start a law firm called Hamilton and Mom. He thought that was funny. Carole didn't think it was too funny.
What about him walking you across the stage? When Chuck walked you across the stage?
Oh, okay.
No, it came,
That
Go
was first time or something, wasn't it?
Oh, at SMU, yeah, when I graduated from SMU Law School, yeah. It was the first time ever that they'd had anybody, a son, walk his mother across the stage, receive her diploma.
It's called hooding, right?
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Okay, Bill?
I finished high school out in Borger, and I went to North Texas, finished there, did basically the same thing Bob did. I did a BBA in marketing, and so I finished there, and I worked for the plexiglass people, selling plexiglass around, 3 different assignments around the country for 15 years. And then I took a year off and toured the country in an Airstream trailer. It was 1979. My dog and I toured the country.
I joined him in Washington, D.C. I flew out there and got, we were just a couple of blocks from the White House.
Yeah, we were in a camper, a wonderful camper, but it was still a camper. And Carole came and spent 4 or 5 days with me, toured Washington, D.C., went down to Charlottesville, Virginia, had a wonderful time, and then Bob came and met me as well.
Yeah. I don't remember much detail.
It was in southern Utah. There's an area down there called Arches National Monument. It is one of the most beautiful parts of America. It's in southern Utah. These big, beautiful sandstone carved from the winds, and it's just a delightful place called Arches National Monument. There's another one called Zion National Monument right next door. So Bob and I met there, and then we spent a couple of days wandering around there, and then we
Went to the Mormon church.
and then we went
Mormon
to
Tabernacle Church.
Well, we went across the Roosevelt Pass, which is how you get over the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. That's how you get from one side of the Rockies to the other. I've got a 4,000-pound car pulling a 5,000-pound trailer.
What was it called? The pass?
Called Roosevelt Pass.
Okay.
And it's at 11,000 feet.
What's that?
I think it's Jill.
It's all of us. It's an Amber Alert.
Oh,
So Roosevelt Pass, okay.
Yeah, and my car was struggling. I mean, it was struggling. We were going 20 miles an hour up the hill, and we were in low gear. I said, Bob, what do we do? And he said, just keep on chugging until we don't have any choice.
yeah.
So then, of course, we got to the top, and we had the opposite problem. We had a 5,000-pound trailer pushing a 4,000-pound car with Bob and I in it.
You were
But-
braking all the time.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, the trailer had brakes on it, and the car had brakes on it. So we managed to do okay, but it was a little harrowing to go through that. And then Bob was with me, and then we went to Salt Lake City, Utah, went through the Mormon church. The head of the Mormon church for 20 years or more, last name was Kimball. And so they loved it when Bob and I showed up there with the last name Kimball, especially spelled Kimball. They were really glad to see us. They wanted to convert us, and Bob and I got a little bit of genealogy. We got some papers from that, but we managed to escape.
That's funny, I didn't know that.
So then after that, I got into financial business. I was in the financial business for 30 years, and I've been retired for about 10 years. But we were talking about mom and dad earlier, and I was thinking about some of my friends wouldn't eat at our house Cause mother would serve Yankee pot roast, and she'd serve lamb, and she'd serve other things that these West Texas heroes wouldn't eat.
You know, beef.
Yeah, they wanted chicken fried steak and gravy, and some chop, and something big for dessert. So they wouldn't eat that. They didn't want that Yankee food that mother was serving them. Speaking about eating, we had a hard and fast rule at our house: be at the dinner table clean and ready to eat at 6 p.m. Daddy and mother and the 3 kids, and so 6 p.m. was a cardinal rule and was hallowed in our home. 6 p.m. be at the table, your hands are washed, and you're ready to eat.
So did 3 cars drive up at 10 till?
Well, it's more like
Converge?
bicycles, and we didn't have cars back in those days. We didn't have our own cars. We would ride bicycles or this, that, and the other, and
Well, I had a little, yellow Chevrolet convertible.
that's right, that's right. We lived 6 miles out of town, so Daddy was glad to have a car, so Mom and Dad wouldn't have to run us to town all the time. So Carole got a car when she turned 16, I think, or something
So
like that.
she ran you to it around
Yeah,
that?
then she became the Uber of the day for the Kimball family.
Yes.
I was thinking about what I recall about my parents, and I remember one time I was in high school, and taking ballet, and so evidently Mother and Newcomb Rice, my teacher, found out that one of the most prima ballerina of the day was getting a week-long class in Dallas, and so they signed me up. And Daddy was gonna take us to Dallas in his airplane. So we drove out to the Borger Airport, got in the plane and ginned up the plane and took off, and in about 10 minutes, oil started coming up over the windshield, and he couldn't see, and it was oil everywhere, so he had to look out the side of the window to try to turn the plane around and come back and land. He landed the airplane, got out of the plane, into his car, went to the First Baptist Church. It was Sunday morning, into the choir, got the mechanic out of the choir, brought him back, and he had to fix the oil can, put the lid back on the
Did
So
you-
the reason he had to fix it is because he failed to put the cap on in the first place.
That's
Oh
right.
my gosh.
But did you get to go to Dallas?
Yeah, then we went on to Dallas.
Okay, well, how is it
Wait just a minute. Yeah, so Daddy was not a quiet personality. So when Daddy came into that church, and he was already mad because he had to turn around and oil all over his windshield, and Dad didn't put up with people doing things wrong. So he was not happy with this guy for failing to put the oil cap on there. So I could just see Dad taking over the church for 10 minutes to get the guy out to the airport as he drug him by the ear and got the oil fixed, and they took off.
We made it safely.
Are you the most like your dad?
Carole and I are both like Daddy. Bob's more like Mama. Bob's more of a B personality. He's quiet, introspective, detail oriented. He's real good at all that stuff, mechanical stuff, engineering stuff, detail stuff. Carole and I are more like Dad, and I am probably most like Dad.
Yeah.
Probably.
How is it that your dad could afford an airplane but not a horse?
When he could afford a horse, he didn't want to have one. Mother had 2 horses.
That's right. She had horses, but he didn't know it.
Yeah, that was out at the Rittenhouse farm.
Yeah.
And so they stayed at the Rittenhouses, and the Rittenhouses kept them up. But there were 2 horses, but Daddy didn't know Mama had 2 horses. Airplanes weren't expensive in those days either. A couple of things that I had notes about. Janice Kimball Troxel was born about 1900, 1901. Margaret Kimball Murdoch was born about 1905 probably. And our dad, Mel Kimball, Dr. Kimball Jr., was born March 16th, 1908. So those are the dates for that. And then our mother, Marion Morris Kimball, was born in New York, New York. And she was born August the 5th, 1909.
Where does the last name English come in?
Just a family name from mother's side.
That's her maiden name.
Whose maiden name?
Well, no, her
Her
Was
name,
her
her
middle
maiden
name?
name is Morris.
Morris, okay, I'm sorry.
Morris. Marion
Facts.
English Morris.
her middle name, which came from her generation, was Marion English Morris.
Okay.
And then when she married Daddy, she became Marion Morris Kimball.
There's a
Just-
Nellie English that,
That's
we-
again mother's side of the family. And Nellie English was mother's aunt
oh,
and served as her mother.
oh,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, her mother disappeared somewhere along the way. Is buried up in Tulsa with some of our other relatives. She died during the war in 1945. But mother's surrogate mother was her aunt, Nellie English.
okay,
Lived back east in New York.
okay.
And then her father married a second time, Aunt, we called her Aunt Ann, and we used to go up to Connecticut to see them a lot, you know, to see, her father and Aunt Ann. That was his second wife.
Nobody traveled during the war, so this was like 47, 48, 49, 50. We went back there because there was no traveling during the war.
Really? You couldn't just get in your car and go somewhere during the war?
You could.
Gasoline was at a
Gas was
premium,
rationed.
tires were at a premium.
We had, everybody was rationed. Shoes were rationed, gasoline was rationed, you know. We couldn't just go out and buy everything you wanted.
No, you had to have these ration cards and ration in order to buy things that were very, very important. One side note, Daddy had a caduceus on the back of his car, which indicated he was a doctor, and doctors got waived from some of those things. So our life wasn't quite as hard as some of the people in our neighborhood.
What's a caduceus?
It's a symbol, the twin snake symbol.
Oh,
that
the
symbols
medical symbol,
medicine.
yeah.
And Daddy had that on his license plate, as all doctors did back in those days.
Uh-huh.
Jill sent me a note and said she wanted to, Jill, come here please and just be with me. Jill, I served in the Army twice. Bob served once, but he served 3 years. But I went in once for a year, and then I got out and went back to college, and I got called back in for a second time for what was called the Berlin crisis. I'm sitting in my apartment in Denton. I was in school, and there were 5 of us living in these 2 apartments. There's this little black and white TV, and John F. Kennedy walked out on the stage. We knew this was coming. All the military guys knew this was coming. John F. Kennedy walked out on the stage and called up a lot of these reserve units that were out of the Army, that had been in the Army, but still had some reserve duty today, which I did. And he sat up there and called our units back to duty. So I had to report to Fort Polk, Louisiana, back in the military for a year. And I too went to OCS, Officer Candidate School, during that period of time. And so Bob and I are both officers and gentlemen, because we have declarations of that when we got our commissions. That's where that term came from, on the commission statement that gets you second lieutenant.
I think that ink is faded now.
It says you're now an officer and a gentleman. And Bob and I are. Come here, Jill.
Paper only.
Come here,
So
Jill.
what's
No,
this
no,
crisis that he called the reserves for?
Berlin.
Berlin crisis.
Yeah,
West Berlin, East Berlin.
yeah. Berlin, there was a problem in Berlin.
You want to pause that for a second, please? What are you doing?
He wants